Eyeshadow is dying. At least that's what I keep hearing all over the internet. And I have to admit, I have noticed some signs. People are doing massive eyeshadow declutters where they're getting rid of half of their palettes, myself included in this. Videos on new eyeshadow palettes aren't getting the views that they once were. And companies are just not releasing palettes nearly at the speed that they were in the past. There was even a Nylon article that came out back in May saying that eyeshadow is now for old ladies. Personally, I don't think eyeshadow is dead, but I have seen a pretty steep decline, especially when it comes to eyeshadow palettes. So we're going to be getting into all of that while I do my makeup. So let's go ahead and jump right in and get started. All right, guys. So in today's video, I'm going to be testing out, among other things, the new Oden's Eye Soulmane 2 palette, and this is called Moon Wish. It looks so beautiful. When I first saw this, I needed to try it, and I know this is a whole video about why eyeshadow palettes are dying, but I don't personally feel that way. I still love eyeshadow and wear eyeshadow every day. So I was excited when I saw this, and even more excited when I first swatched it. So this color story is colorful, but it's not too bright. So it's still the level of color that's within my comfort zone. And I just love these ethereal colors that are a little more on the cool tone side. And I think where this palette really shines are the shimmer shades, because in the past, when I've tried Oden's Eye formula, I like it, but I find that the shimmers are always those really hard packed shimmers that just kind of pick up a tiny bit of color and mostly glitter. And I know those are trendy right now, but these actually feel super creamy. So I just want to show you how these swatch. This is the shade Mercury and this is the shade Pluto. Like, just look at how smooth they are, and they're so reflective. They have that really creamy feel where they're almost like a cream shadow. I mean, they are just stunning. I am definitely so excited to finally do a look with this palette. So I'm going to start with the P. Louise base first, and this is in the shade Rumor 2. This is an eyeshadow primer, which I didn't realize when I unboxed it in last week's PR unboxing video. I wasn't sure if it was concealer or what it was. It just says base. It doesn't say eyeshadow base, but I have been using it ever since many of you kindly told me what it was, and it is an incredible eyeshadow base. It just evens out your skin tone on your eyes. It cancels out all the discoloration. It just covers everything. Like, it's really full coverage, but I love how it dries down so your shadow blends really nicely on top of it. I kind of get why this is such a popular product. I honestly had no idea because it's a brand that I hadn't really followed before, but a lot of you have told me that this is one of their most popular products, and I can definitely see why. Like, you can see a big difference between my two eyes. So I think I definitely want to do like a pinky purple look today, and I'm going to start out with the shade Crater, which is this pink right here. So anyway, back to the topic at hand. I was really curious to see if eyeshadow is really declining or if it's just us in the beauty community that are noticing it, because sometimes we get wrapped up in our own little world and we see something like, for example, how people say that MAC is dying as a brand, or brands like Lancome, when in reality, so many people actually still do buy these brands. It's just that in the beauty community, they're not as trendy. So it made me wonder, is it just us that are saying eyeshadow palettes are dying, or does everybody kind of feel the same way? And I went over to Google Trends, which is such a fun site, by the way, and you can plug in basically any search term and they'll show you how often it's been searched, and you can go back as far as you want, or like as close as you want, even within the last couple of days. So I just went back to like 2004, because I think that was the furthest you could go back. And I searched for interest in eyeshadow palettes to see what happened. And you can see in February of 2010, it went from being totally flat, because I think before that eyeshadow palettes weren't even really a thing. And all of a sudden it kind of starts creeping up. And I associate this with the beginning of YouTube, because this is when YouTubers really started to come out a little bit more in 2010. It's definitely when I started watching some of those OG creators. And then in the years following, we saw things like the Urban Decay Naked palette coming out. So of course, things started to go on an upward trend right then from 2010. And then we see see March 1st of 2016, the next date that they show, you really see like this huge spike. And that's when I think it was like the Too Faced Peach palette and the Modern Renaissance, I think, had just come out the year before. I want to say those were maybe 2015, maybe they were 2016, but either way, this was like peak eyeshadow palette. All of a sudden, brands were realizing that they were super hot and they just kept releasing them at this crazy rapid pace. We do see a little dip in March of 2020, and they were already kind of declining a little. And we see a little bit of decline just during those years when we were wearing masks and we weren't really going out much. And then in 2021, 22, we see this huge spike in people searching for eyeshadow palettes again. And I think that's because it's kind of that time when we all started to go back out again. But really, it was short-lived because you see it's been on a downward trend for the last 2 years. And right now, it's at that point where it just, if you look all the way back across the chart, it's like right before it started to take off in 2016. So we're at levels below what they were years ago. And it just is continuing on this downward slope. So I thought that was really interesting to see it actually in a chart. I'm a really visual person. And when people are talking about stuff, I have to like see it, I have to see it all laid out. And this really showed for me just that rise and fall of the interest in eyeshadow palettes over the years. So I thought that was so cool. But I have my own reasons why I think things are declining. So reason number one for me is that the market just got too saturated. And I think a lot of us would agree with that. Going back years, I remember when eyeshadow palettes were released quarterly or even twice a year, maybe like in the spring and in the fall, and that was it. And then all of a sudden, it ramped up to the point where you would see eyeshadow palettes being released constantly, with ColourPop being one of the biggest offenders. At one point, they were releasing an eyeshadow palette every single week. And at first, I remember trying to buy all of their eyeshadow palettes and I collected them. And after a while, it got to be too much. I had hundreds of them and I had to end up decluttering a bunch because there were so many that kind of looked the same and I just didn't wear them. And, I think for a while, many of us fell into that trap of like, well, okay, this palette looks just like something that I have before, but it's so pretty. It's like beautiful neutrals or whatever it was that speaks to you and you feel like you still had to have it. But even over time, that started to wear off to the point where now it's like, oh, another neutral palette. I really don't care. That feeling just started to wear off a little bit and it started to feel just uninspiring when you see a new palette. So the market really did get way too saturated and it just started to feel like there's nothing new anymore, which brings me to reason number two, which is that we all have way too much. I'm just going to deepen the crease a little bit with the shade Planet right here. I think so many of us kept up with the new releases for a while, and because of that, we've amassed huge collections that we can't possibly use up. And I'm not even talking about someone like me who's on YouTube, but just everyday average consumers that I see over on my Facebook group. Some of you I know have YouTuber-sized collections, but even if you don't, even if you have 20 palettes, at some point you can never conceivably use that much eyeshadow in your lifetime. I don't know about you guys, but I tend to reach for the same eyeshadow palettes over and over, just the same few. And the rest of them just sit in a drawer. I mean, I have the original Naked palette and I have Naked 2, Naked 3, all of the iterations of that. I have the Tartelette in Bloom, the Too Faced Sweet Peach palette, and I keep them for nostalgia, but I'm never going to use those up ever. I mean, I don't even use them, let alone so many other palettes that I've purchased since then. And eyeshadows also tend to last longer than other cosmetics, any type of cream products or mascara, things that you have to replace more frequently. When it comes to eyeshadows, I think a lot of us keep them for years and years. So I think a lot of us just feel like we don't need to replace what we have, let alone add to it, because then it just becomes even more overwhelming. So I know, even just speaking for myself, it all got to be way too much. Just on a side note, I think this eyeshadow is performing really well. I want to use the shade Mercury down here, which is this really cool tone purple. So that brings me to reason number 3, which is that brands just aren't releasing eyeshadow palettes at the same rate anymore. I think they've noticed a slowdown in people purchasing them and they're just following suit. At one point, like I mentioned, ColourPop used to release a new palette every week, and now I notice they sometimes go a month or more without releasing a new one. As I'm sitting here today, it's July 19th, and the last new palette that they released was May 9th. It was the Pokemon collection. I actually had to go back through their Instagram feed and see when it was, but yeah, May 9th. So it's been more than 2 months since a new one from ColourPop. And in the meantime, they've released their juicy lip products, they've released liquid blushes. They're kind of just doing other things that are a little bit more trendy right now. And it's just such a huge turnaround from what they were doing before. I mean, I definitely know that I've noticed it. I don't know about you guys or if you pay attention, but I definitely think it's in response to slowing sales when it comes to eyeshadow. I was actually in Ulta the other day, and I know this is just kind of anecdotal, but I was talking to someone who works there, and she was saying that when she first started working there several years ago, Morphe and ColourPop used to fly off the shelves, and it was mostly the younger consumers buying their eyeshadow palettes. And now she said they just kind of sit there, and if eyeshadow palettes are selling, it's the more expensive luxury brands, and it's older consumers that are purchasing them. So I thought that was kind of interesting, and I think that also just speaks to the trends shifting in a different direction, especially when it comes to Gen Z, because they tend to drive a lot of the trends that we're seeing over on TikTok especially, and then they sort of trickle over this way. Next up for eyeliner, I'm gonna use the Judy Doll Slim Liquid Eyeliner in the shade Deep Brown. I love this one so much. It has the tiniest little tip, great for hooded eyes. So reason number 4 might seem like kind of an obvious one, but it's 2020. I mean, we all know what happened, and I think part of it, again, going back to Gen Z, who are driving a lot of these trends, they were teenagers in 2020 and getting into their makeup wearing years, basically. And when we were all forced to stay home and then wearing masks and all of that, and people just weren't wearing as much makeup, in general, I noticed that we've just become a much more casual society. I know I've talked about this in other videos, but when I go to the mall, for example, probably half of the people that I see there are either wearing pajama pants or sweatpants. People just, ever since 2020, I've seen the rise in athleisure or just super, super casual clothing. I rarely see people walking around wearing jeans or regular pants or even dresses. And if I do, they're usually older people. Again, it's not the younger generation. They are all about wearing really comfy stuff, and I totally don't blame them, because it also took me a while to get back into wearing jeans after we were so comfy for a while. But it's just the casual vibe that everybody has lately. I've noticed just from talking to people I know who have Gen Z kids and stuff, that they just don't want to be bothered with doing makeup. They don't want to be bothered doing a full beat. They're more interested in just very simple, very quick looks that are more skin focused. And they're also into just getting their makeup reviews in short format. So they're looking at TikTok, they're looking at YouTube Shorts and Instagram. Like I mentioned in the beginning, 2010, when YouTube first started kind of really ramping up, I remember before that, I used to get all of my beauty advice from beauty magazines, and they would always churn out the same exact advice year after year and the same products year after year. And then when YouTube came around, I started learning about products I knew nothing about. I started learning new techniques, for eyeshadow, watching Jaclyn Hill and other channels like her, where they were just doing things differently than we were taught. So for a lot of us, it was a huge awakening for makeup, and I know for me, it really changed the game. I'm just going to be using the new Milk Makeup tubing mascara. Yeah, it really changed things a lot for me, and just how I looked at makeup and application methods and all of that. And I think now it's all kind of widely known, and it's been out there for a long time. It's not new. So I think the younger generation is just a little bit less impressed than we were. Another thing that happened in 2020, and this is not just something that happened with Gen Z, but everybody, is it was just a really hard time for a lot of people. People lost their jobs and were out of work for a long time. They were more focused on necessities rather than makeup. And I think that's sort of continued even since then. We've seen the rise of inflation. We've seen a lot of people talking about how, they're trying to put food on the table and pay their rent. But yeah, I think since 2020, people are just not as interested in adding to the makeup collections. Not to mention, back in 2015, 2016, it was like kind of a flex to show these huge collections and to unbox everything. I remember when palettes would sell out in a day back then, and people were scrambling to buy them on eBay or Mercari for like double or triple the price, just because you wanted to be able to say you had this palette. Like I said, it was a flex for everyone. But after 2020, I think all of the flexing and the bragging about your makeup collection started to be seen more as cringy and out of touch. And then I think this just applies to mainstream eyeshadow brands, but I found that a lot more people are becoming interested in indie brands, like Odin's Eye, for example, rather than the mainstream brands. And I've personally noticed a huge shift. If, again, I look over at everyone in my Facebook group, so many people are buying from the indie brands like Lethal, like Sydney Grace, or Odin's Eye. And I think that, indie brands usually have better formulas than the mainstream brands. They're definitely very like high-end, very high pigment. And also they just tend to have more of those special shades, the duochromes and the multi-chromes and things that you don't see in the regular palettes at the stores. So if you want more special eyeshadows, that's really what you're going to get when you go toward the indie brands. And I think with a lot of consumers turning more toward those indie brands, then we're seeing the mainstream brands like ColourPop and Morphe slow down their releases because people aren't buying those as much. They're turning to the indie brands instead. I know, again, just speaking from personal experience, I used to do videos every time a new palette came out, whether it was from Huda Beauty, Natasha Denona, whatever it was. When I did a video, my views would be sky high for a palette, and now I can't even really do a video just on a palette by itself because the views will tank. Like they are in the toilet. If I'm gonna speak about a new palette, like I am today, for example, I have to include other things. Otherwise, very few people watch it. So I think that kind of just, at least from my experience, and I'm sure other YouTubers could say the same thing, is that palette reviews are not what they once were. For complexion, I'm just gonna use the Tier Mask Fit Aura Cushion in the shade 23. So reason number 6, and I think this is going to be highly personal. This is something that it's just my opinion, and I'm sure there are others out there who feel the same way as I do and other people who definitely don't. But those people who were not great at eyeshadow application to begin with are probably feeling a little bit relieved. I know I am. I've admittedly never been super good at eyeshadow application, and especially going back again to those early days of 2010 to 2015, I would always wonder why my eyeshadow didn't look like Jaclyn Hill's, why it didn't look like these other people that I watched. And it took me years to figure out that I have hooded eyes, and really eyeshadow application depends so much on your eye shape. And back then, everybody was kind of doing the exact same method and way of applying eyeshadow, and it really doesn't work for everybody. Not everybody can do like the standard windshield wiper in the crease and, whatever the formula was at the time. I think placement really matters, but it took me years to figure that out. And even when I did, I still feel like I'm not the best at blending. It's never been my strong suit. I mean, I'm not going to totally put myself down. I feel like I've come a long way since I started on YouTube, but I'm not a makeup artist. A lot of us kind of felt let down when we would watch these eyeshadow tutorials and ours didn't really come out the same. And it was really frustrating. So when there was this huge focus on eyeshadow and eyeshadow looks all the time, I just would constantly feel like less than, and I hated that there was such a focus on it because it was something that wasn't my strong suit. So now seeing this whole less is more trend and really just slicking a one and done across my lid, adding some mascara and liner and calling it a day just feels more comfortable for me, I guess, because that's typically what I would do if I wasn't on camera anyway. Next up for blush, I want to use one of the new Odin's Eye blushes. They have the shades Lilac Mist, which is a gorgeous lilac. Then we have Pink Bloom, which is a cool toned dusty pink. The other one, unfortunately, shattered on my kitchen floor. If you watch my Instagram stories, you probably saw that. So this is Solar Eclipse, and it's a really shimmery coral shade with some gold mixed in. So I'll swatch it for you guys really quick just so you can see what the color looks like, but I'm definitely going to be wearing one of the cool tone shades today. So here on the top, we have Pink Bloom, then we have Lilac Mist, and then on the bottom is the Solar Eclipse shade. So I think I'm going to go with Lilac Mist today. It looks really gorgeous. And I'm going to go really sparingly with this because it looks very pigmented. Oh yeah. So by the way, this is the Sigma Soft Sculpt brush. So anyway, reason number 7 is the blush craze. There is such a huge push for blush right now. I honestly could not have timed this video any more perfectly. I'm talking about blush as I'm applying blush. But anyway, yes, there is such a huge trend. And again, I went over to Google to look at the trends for blush, and I was not surprised at all. We've seen a very obvious, slow but steady upward trend since 2010, and just the last couple of years, it's jumped up in leaps and bounds, getting even more popular, and the chart just continues to go up. So there's really no end in sight right now. And just as I'm scrolling through social media, whether it's Instagram, TikTok, or on YouTube, when I see people applying blush, they're applying a lot of blush. Like, it's a huge thing. And going back to all of those beauty magazines that we used to read, we probably all remember the advice that if you're gonna go heavy with your blush, you have to go minimal with your eyes and your lips. And you really have to just play up one area and not focus too much on all of them. So that advice always stuck with me and does even to the present day. If I'm wearing a really heavy smoky eye, I will keep my blush and lips super minimal. And if I'm wearing a bolder lip, which I rarely do, but let's say I do decide to wear a red lip or like a bright orange lip like I did recently, I'll keep my blush and eyeshadow extremely neutral, very natural looking. So I think just with this focus on blush and so many people just wanting that brighter pop of color on their cheeks, they're not going to focus on the eyes and lips quite as much. We've also seen a huge lip trend toward glosses and lip oils and balmy lipsticks that don't have a lot of color. And I think, again, it's because people are just focusing mostly on cheeks. But like all trends, it is going to die at some point and something else is going to take its place. I keep hearing that matte lipsticks are coming back. So maybe heading towards the fall, we'll start to see more bold lips. Personally, I'm loving the trend of more balmy lipsticks. By the way, this is the NYX Slick Click in the shade DM Me. I absolutely love these. They're so great. But yeah, having dry lips, that's always kind of what I've gone for. And I've just learned over time, especially as I get older, not to always follow the trends. You know, if something isn't going to completely suit you and it's not going to work for you, like thinking back to 2010 eyeshadow where I just didn't necessarily feel comfortable wearing like 5 or 6 different colors of eyeshadow on my lid. Like, I don't have to do that. I think in the moment, it's always fun to try new trends, and I think we should, because you never know when you're going to discover something that looks really great on you. But if it doesn't work out, and if you don't like the way that it looks, you can always just move on and do what you feel comfortable with. And if you're someone who loves eyeshadow and you aren't really into the blush trend as much, I think you should still wear eyeshadow. Who cares what the internet says or thinks? At the end of the day, I always say, do what makes you happy, do what makes you feel comfortable and what makes you feel like the best version of yourself. The trends be damned. So anyway, guys, I would love to hear your thoughts on this whole eyeshadow is dying thing. Do you really feel like it's dying? Are you less into eyeshadow than you were before? Or are you still just as into it as ever? I would love to hear your thoughts, as always, down in the comments below. And if you like commentary style makeup videos like this, I will put another one right up here in case you want to check that one out next. Thank you guys so much. I really, truly appreciate all of you who took the time to watch this video. And if you enjoyed it, I hope you'll consider hitting the subscribe button as well. Thank you guys. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you all in my next one. Take care. Bye.